we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. It's awesome to have you guys back here. If it's your first time listening, though, welcome to the podcast. If you want to support the podcast or reach out, please hit us up on Instagram or Twitter at the Bigmark Pod. You can also check us out at Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. If you ever wanted to support the podcast, you know, there's different levels of engagement there, if you will. Yeah, if you want to rate the podcast or subscribe, that'd be great. So you know the next time one of our episodes come out. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell. Make sure you know when the next episode comes out. You know, it's interesting with the analytics of the show. I try to look at them and try to kind of figure out who's watching more on YouTube or who's listening. Kind of seems to be 50-50, but anyway, hit me up and tell me if you're watching or if you're listening on wherever, whether it's Spotify or Apple Music. I know we're on like about 7 different platforms, Google Play, basically wherever you get your podcasts. So yeah, check us out on YouTube. I'm sure we get demonetized all the time because I fucking swear, and it's always explicit and it's always short, but who gives a fuck? And shout out everyone who watches. I love y'all. And yeah, like I said, you know, I love doing these podcasts. It's tons of fun. And, you know, like I said, if you ever wanted to support the podcast, go check us out on the Patreon and shoot us a couple shekels, you know, help us support, get new cameras, get all that fun stuff and keep us making great content for you and all that fun shit. Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's, you know, after Christmas right now, kind of the holiday season, like Jerry Seinfeld said, you know, people tend to snap out of that holiday spirit like a drunken stupor. And, you know, you still kind of feel it. And it's funny with social media, things kind of just keep lingering around. And all the good Christmas memes seem to come out like a day after Christmas this year, which is super weird. But hey, what can you do? But you know, I was kind of like looking through some of the stuff I got, and amazing. I got this awesome shirt from Pops Ninja. Hey guys in Germany. And, you know, a bunch of other great stuff. And, you know, I was also, when I was kind of putting some stuff away, I was checking out my vinyl collection, and, you know, I've gone through phases of really listening to a lot of vinyl, and I've gone through phases where, you know, I've kind of got away from it a little bit. And something, and it's going to be the topic of the podcast today, but, you know, it's something that I really wanted to talk about. And obviously it's something that I love and a lot of people love. But it kind of, maybe about 2-3 years ago, it was booming. Everyone was getting vinyls. Everyone was loving it. And probably about, I guess that maybe would have started, I want to say like around 2010, there was a big vinyl resurgence. I'm sure there's an actual date, but when I look back on it, definitely around 2010, like when I was getting into university, that vinyl craze was really starting to happen. I got my first record player and speakers in London when I was there at school, and I got a freaking killer deal. I got I'm actually looking at it right now. It's in here in the studio. I got to have a SuperScope, like turntable, receiver, all in one kind of thing. And I did some research on it when I was buying it, and I was thinking, I've never really heard of this company. You know, it's not any of the big names that I would have ever heard of, but apparently they were the precursor company to Marantz, which is a very, very popular continues to make really quality hi-fi parts. So great, coming out of Great Britain. It's all manufactured there. And yeah, it's a great little system. And it's funny because when I first got it, I kind of, you know, I wasn't wasn't really thinking too much about it just because it was such a good deal. It came with the speakers, it came with everything. Normally, you can buy a turntable on its own. You can get the receiver, which is kind of gets the information from the turntable, and then sends it to the speakers through an amp. So you can have all these different parts of a hi-fi. Which again, this is so funny. Like hi-fi standing for high fidelity. Even nowadays, like not too many people even know what that is because technology-wise, like we've gotten so far away from it. And I'll get into it, but it's interesting how innovation drove things to make life easier and make life better and more convenient. But maybe that you know, maybe that didn't really actually bring us to where we want to be for enjoying music anyway. So it's really interesting with how technology does kind of ever creep forward. And again, it's kind of, we always have to ask ourselves, the question is, can we, but should we? So anyway, my SuperScope system has Akai speakers, which are cool speakers. They're kind of larger. And again, I didn't really go crazy in my whole setup. You can go nuts and spend thousands of dollars and get the top of the line stuff. But I realized later after I kind of bought the system that my turntable is, I guess, like a party turntable. So if you don't know, again, most people think of turntables, DJs, whatever. You put one album down, you move over the swing arm, and there's a needle on that, and the needle actually physically comes in contact with the record. The record itself has grooves in it, and in fact, the grooves are kind of V-shaped. And on one side of the groove is the left channel, and one side of the groove is the right channel. And as this needle kind of drags through the grooves, the system is designed in a way that it can pick up those finite movements from the needle and turn it into music. Old technology, man, like amazingly old. In fact, that they even think that potentially like ancient Egyptians or ancient East Asian countries were kind of figuring out kind of doing stuff with clay and like running like hay, like a broom almost, like running that over it and somehow conducting and preserving sound. Because that's where it all comes from, right? It's all about preserving music. And obviously we can have paintings, obviously we can have books, but up until digital recording anyway, or even way before digital recording, way before like recording on magnetic tape or any of the quote unquote analog systems, that's how humans wanted to preserve music, was phonographs. Somehow they didn't know how to do it, so it took a long time. And for that matter, it would have made musicians all the more popular and all the more important, because you couldn't preserve music. Your Mozarts, your Bachs, all that, they wrote the music down on paper, and you had the notes there. But if you weren't a competent musician or didn't have a fucking orchestra, how could you possibly ever enjoy that music, right? So musicians would have been so important, and would have been really the only way you could ever listen to music was actually listening to it live. So I digress. Anyway, the little bit of a backstory on kind of like what the records are all about, what recording music is all about. And you know, that's kind of the way it's going to. It kind of started right with these wax cylinders or clay cylinders or whatever you want to call it. And once it got to these records, vinyl records or whatever, that was kind of like the main way you listen to music for the longest time. So again, like I said, most records, I guess, anyway, records would have been, you know, kind of coming out in like 20s, 30s kind of thing, but like they continue to produce records to today. But you know, up until I guess the late 80s when they actually created CDs, or in the 80s when they actually created CDs, you know, that's the only thing you were listening to. So again, usually when we're putting an album on a turntable, we're putting one on, we're moving that arm, drop the needle, play the music. My system, like many systems from the time, I guess is like a party system. So it has a little bit of a longer peg, like where you actually put the record, and you can essentially stack records on top of it. So instead of having to take the record off, put it back in the sleeve, do the whole thing. During like a party or get together where you want to listen to a lot of music, obviously you're listening to them all on one side at a time, but you essentially can put the record on, and then when you hit a button, the record will automatically drop down, the swing arm will come over automatically and drop. So interesting, very automated for the time. I mean, again, it's all pulleys and fucking gears and shit, but again, very interesting. My forte into, or foray, my forte, that's not my forte. Anyway, my foray kind of into vinyl records was through this system. So, it's super, super special to me. It actually has an 8-track player. The guy I bought it from said, don't even bother using it. It's just going to jam. So, okay, I won't use it. Anyway, we already kind of gave you a little bit of a background on, the importance of vinyl and kind of why we even try to preserve music. But again, I love vinyl because of the experience of listening to it. It's more so than just kind of clicking, a song on a screen and listening to it. Obviously, growing up myself, I was born in 1991, so I was more or less, a kid in the 90s, and that's where CDs were happening. In fact, they were even getting away from cassettes, because there was cassettes, there was vinyl, there was CDs. I guess there would have been probably still some 8-tracks left, but there was kind of 3 big things going out. I had a lot of cassettes because a lot of cars had cassettes in them. Again, the biggest knock against vinyl is that it's not portable at all. So when people started coming up with cars, they had to come up with a way to do it, and they invented a cassette. And then that literally has tape in it. It's still an analog style of music preservation. Analog being the opposite of digital. So analog sound would mean that there is a physical connection somewhere along the lines that either puts the music onto the medium and or reads it off said medium. So like a vinyl record or a tape cassette. When they're recording music in general, it's recorded onto tape. It's usually 2.5-inch tape, so it's like big, or 2.25, whatever the fucking dimension is. It's a big, thick tape, and then the cassette is just a shrunk down version of that master tape. But the CD industry, I'm sure, led by God knows how many different backdoor channels. But not only just backdoor channels, it was led by the fact that you could get a whole album on a small little disc, and you could have both sides on one side. You didn't have to flip the disc over and change it. You could just put it in the machine and leave it. And at the time, they were talking a really big game about digital sound and digital recording and all that stuff in their late 80s, early 90s, until today, really. The fact that, it's going to make life so much easier. And it fucking does. Like, straight up, at the end of the day, digital recording is so much easier than analog recording. Analog recording meaning you're going to record right onto the magnetic tape. So that means you're going to need an engineer to cut the fucking, an engineer and a producer to actually, record the music onto the tape. And then if you need to edit the tape, you need to know someone who can cut the tape and put it back together. And there's about 10 different jobs involved back in the day when you used to try to record an album. Album budgets would be over $100,000. You could do whatever you wanted back in the day, but it was not so accessible to the people. So engineers and technology started catching up with itself and saying, listen, how can we actually make life easier, and how can we make this process better, and have people in their home kind of fucking do their own thing. With the hope that it's going to make so much more music. Imagine giving everyone the power to record their own album. It's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be all this huge flood of music. Oh, look at that. There's our logo, everybody. Shout out again, Scott Barker. Whoops. Sorry, we're a little bit on the fly today, boys and girls, but I love it. So yeah, again, they expected this big flood of songs and talent and music because we're putting it in everyone's hands and knocking down barriers and subverting gatekeepers and all that fucking shit. But it hasn't necessarily made for that necessarily to happen, right? Maybe in general it's brought the level of music up, just like on the whole, because there's so much good music out there and you have to be that much better to crack through. But there's still gatekeepers. There's still people that still actually run the show and do all that stuff, right? And then, you know, again, at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, you still weren't necessarily at the point that where we are today with, you know, if you have a Mac, you have GarageBand in your computer right now. If you're listening or watching on your computer right now, you could go and record a song right now, stop and pause the podcast and actually record a song that could be just as good or better than any of the music that you hear on the top 40 stations right now. And in fact, most of the music that is a hit right now was made on someone's laptop, not necessarily in a big, huge studio. Maybe sometimes you go into the studio to get some specific effects essentially from the studio or ambiance or studio effects. But again, you know, what I have here, you can do a pretty good at-home recording. It's not going to be amazing because I'm not necessarily completely well-versed in the actual recording and editing software. But if I had my buddy, like Nate McCrory, shout out Nate McCrory, if he came over here, he knows how to use that shit, and we could get some really, really good sounding stuff. As long as we had a quiet room and all that stuff, you can capture amazing stuff, whatever, right? So again, all this innovation that happened led to amazing things that we can do today. But if you're asking me, it hasn't necessarily made for better music, at least better sounding music. Because the biggest problem is, when they invented CDs, they also invented digital music. Now, the biggest problem with digital music is that it's kind of like a bit of a trick to your ear. So if you think of moving pictures, let's say, so a movie or whatever, I think it only has to be like 24 or 26 frames per second that it makes it look like a moving picture to us. Any slower than that, it'll look like just moving kind of stop animation images, right? But if we can move it fast enough, it tricks the eye into thinking that there's moving pictures. So what digital music does is it basically tricks your ear into thinking that it's a full audio landscape, if we want to put it that way, and we want to sound really fucking corny. But it's you know, it's this. If you look at it, if you picture music on a graph or like a sound wave, it's essentially a series of dots that are like doot, 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 with different tones, that when they're moving fast enough, it actually all comes out into music and tricks our ear into thinking that this is a full sounding song, recording, whatever the fuck you want to call it. And there was high fidelity CDs. There was all this stuff to make it sound pretty good. But at the end of the day, it is missing information. And it's really interesting. And that's just the way computers work, is they have to break things down into bits. And that's also how we were able to manipulate the sound and edit the sound, was changing it into this form so that it could be manipulated in the digital world. Now, that came with digital mixing boards, that came with digital effects, and again, the sky was the fucking limit. But the beauty about analog system is that although it was limited, it gave you that kind of aiming point, that envelope you could only push so far. But you knew how far you could push it, and those boundaries were, you know, it wasn't an endless frontier, but you kind of knew what you could do. And the artists of that day, again, pushed the limits to the max. So what digital eventually did is it removed all those boundaries, which in theory sounds amazing, but now you can kind of sit in front of your fucking computer and scratch your fucking head going, I don't even know where to start, because it's so the possibilities are literally endless, which is good. But again, it is the paradox. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? So Neil Young has been a big proponent of continuing to keep analog music around. A lot of major music files or audio files, people who really like listening to really good quality music, always were strong proponents for analog, and in fact railed against the CD industry. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, do you just kind of wait till your system, or wait till the old systems die out, and then no matter what's left, it's just going to be the new thing, and then you're never going to have to make a choice? Or do you try to keep those old things alive as a preservation, as so we don't forget, so that we don't end up trying to reinvent the same thing down the road? I don't know. It's a tough thing, because again, there is so much benefit, and there are so many possibilities with new and improved things. It'll always beg the question. But again, that digital sound, only can go so far. And in fact, they started creating different pieces of digital equipment, computer equipment, whatever, that started somehow filling in the blanks, I guess, or converting it back into more of an analog sound, which was really interesting, right? So you started saying, oh, I guess people want this old analog sound. And to me, the best analog sound that you can kind of get your hands on is vinyl. I bet the best analog sound you can get is finding like reel-to-reel tape, or listening to the actual master tapes in the studio. That's what I've heard from producers and other musicians, is that is always the best listening experience, is listening right at the board with the big speakers in a quiet room, high fidelity, like to the max. But what's accessible is a vinyl record. So you can get these records that have amazing sound. And that's actually one of the things so I don't consider myself a major collector. I have, I think over 70 albums. That's nothing crazy. I'd like to continue to collect, but again, like I said, I've kind of ebbed and flowed from them for a reason. And as much as I love analog sound, there's a little bit more involved with listening to music. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You actually, there is so much more to the vinyl record. And, it's, here, for instance, I have a couple records here with me. Sorry for everyone just listening, but I have Close to the Edge here by Yes. Really interesting album. Looking at it, doesn't look like much on the cover, but as soon as you open it up, it's amazing artwork, right? So again, these are the experiences that you can get with vinyl that you don't usually get with a small, tiny CD, and in fact, definitely not what you get with an MP3. This is another one of my favorite albums, Van Morrison, Astral Weeks. So I got this album specifically for some of the sounds that are on this album. Just beautiful, different accents, and it's just, again, amazing, and I love it. And that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to get it on vinyl, because as much as it sounds so cool on CD or an MP3, which is kind of the next thing that came from CDs, were these MP3s, the files on their own, they're just missing that extra pizzazz. And analog sound, which is unlike digital sound with those dots, analog sound is a very smooth wave. It's a full wave. The sound that is coming from my voice into this microphone is analog. Unfortunately, the sound that you're hearing right now is digital, which is funny. But when you're speaking to someone in person, or when you're hearing a live instrument, an acoustic instrument being played, that sound wave coming out is smooth, full. That is analog sound. And again, it gets lost in the MP3 world. And don't get me wrong, basically since LimeWire and Napster and all that fucking shit went down, CDs even kind of died, where the only way to really combat all that music piracy was for iTunes to come out and charge $1 a song, which inherently split up an entire album into all these different singles. and that essentially got people away from listening to whole albums. Even when I was little and still listening to CDs, though, there were a lot of throwaway fucking songs and albums where you could tell it was just all about that one single. So that whole single mentality had always kind of existed in music. But basically, since iTunes made that whole buying a single song instead of having to buy the whole album a thing, it just made artists put a lot of time into just releasing really one single. You didn't have to release a whole album. And that's the sad part, because, you know, you look at albums today, even like this is another one of my favorites, Alt J. Great album, sounds amazing in vinyl. You know, you got lyrics in there too, which is another experience that you don't usually get. Obviously, you have to look them up today, which is not impossible. Again, all this stuff, it's not impossible, but you can get so much more from these albums. And when a lot of these older albums, especially, you know, take Dark Side of the Moon or Tommy, any of these rock operas, they knew that you're going to be there listening to it for at least 24 minutes. So each side of a record is only 24 minutes. You can't put any more on. So it's only 48 minutes in total. So every artist knew that this was, again, we talk about limitations. Every artist knew that this was the limitation of the medium. You can't put any more music onto an album other than 48. And then even especially only on one side is 24. So you know at a certain point they're going to have to take the album off and flip it. But at least you got them for 24 minutes. And oh my God, could you imagine getting someone's attention for 24 minutes today? Insane, right? So that was how a lot of artists knew, and that's how they made their albums. That's how they put the track listing in. I know some artists struggled with that because they wanted to move a track at a different part in the track listing, but you can only fit so much music into a vinyl album. It's unlimited on a CD. It's definitely unlimited on fucking streaming or MP3s. You can do whatever you want. You can have a 100,000-minute song on an MP3, and it's never going to run out, and it's never going to do anything. No one's going to fucking listen to it, but you can do it, right? So these are the things. Yes, you can, but should you, right? And again, you know, it's the experience of sitting there, opening the album. You feel it, you smell it, especially if it's old and vintage. You kind of smell that old, smells like an old book kind of. You pull it out of its lining. You take the album out. You look at it. You want to make sure it's clean, because it's really important. So you have that essence of taking care of it, because if it's dirty, it's not gonna work very well. You don't want to bend it or warp it or break it. And then when you put it down onto the turntable and you move that needle and it puts the needle down and you hear that music start seemingly magically out of nowhere, you then experience everything that music and that artist is there to tell you. You can sit there with the album, you can look at it, you can read the liner notes, you can read lyrics if the artist put it there. There's some information about the band, there's pictures of the band. And again, it's basically a 1 foot by 1 foot art piece that you can look at, and in fact it's 2 feet when you open it, right? 2 feet by 1 foot rectangle that you could put a lot of really cool stuff in, like I said before. Then you have double albums, triple albums, quadruple albums. I think this is a quad album that I have, which is Alexis on Fire at Cops, which was amazing, which was a concert that I actually was at. It was supposed to be their last concert ever. It was amazing. I almost got a tattoo, not this one specifically, but I almost got like the stamp of Cops Coliseum in there. Tremendous. Somewhere, I don't even know if this is going to fit in frame here, but I'm in this picture somewhere. I don't know where, but I'm somewhere in there. If you're not watching on YouTube, in the inside of this album, there's a giant picture of the floor at Cops Coliseum when they played there, and me and my buddies were on the floor. Shout out Lep, shout out Peltz, shout out all the boys. And again, you know, the other thing too is there's a lot of re-releases of albums that, like, I mean, when the Black Album? The Black Album came out in 2003, so they probably weren't going to necessarily release this on on vinyl, so they might have released this later. But again, hip hop albums, anything you can possibly think of that has fucking sound in it, that if that sound is better, like Dr. Dre, all these boys really cared. RZA, Wu-Tang Clan, they really cared about the music that they were making. They cared about the fidelity. They cared about how it sounded. And the best way to hear it back in those days, especially, was definitely on vinyl, and any music for that matter. And it is beautiful that they do have these re-releases and all these things. And these are just a couple of my favorite albums. I could probably, if you do, me and the boys were kind of talking about it before, but I want to continue to talk about some of my favorite albums, and I have a few, and again, if you join on the Patreon, we'll check out Bigmark's Vinyl Corner. It's a little segment where we're just gonna kind of chat vinyl for a little bit, talk about the vinyl for the week. Not even that long, but again, just getting that out there, continuing to engage with everybody. I want to hear what your guys' favorite album is. I want to hear, if you've never listened to albums, hit me up. One of my favorite stories ever was listening to Rodriguez, Sixto Rodriguez. I have one of his albums, and listening to Sugar Man with all my football buddies was one of the most special moments of my entire life. And, again, I hope everyone listening can go out, grab an album if you have it, get a turntable and go listen to some of your favorite music on vinyl, because it's going to be beautiful. It's going to sound that much better. And yeah, enjoy. And I want to hear from you. So hit me up, hit me on the Instagram, hit me on Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod. Go watch Bigmark's Vinyl Corner on the Patreon, patreon.com/the Bigmark Pod. Subscribe, rate the podcast. You can rate the podcast on Spotify if you're listening to it now. Rate us on Apple Podcasts. Whoever rated us, whoever rates us number one, will get a big fat kiss from me. I love all you guys. We'll see you soon. Tell your friends about us. Go listen to some vinyl, and doot. Peace.